Welcome to part 1 of the Rendering in KeyShot Studio for Beginners series. By the time you finish this tutorial, you will have taken a raw CAD model that looks like this and used KeyShot Studio to create a marketing image that looks like this. CGI is the future of advertising, and presenting your ideas in the most accurate and beautiful light possible is the key to helping others see your vision. In this beginner-friendly tutorial series, I'm going to show you the most important things you need to know to begin creating realistic product renderings in KeyShot. And be sure to stick around to the end to learn how to fill this grinder with peppercorns. Let's go. Before we can open KeyShot, you'll need to download the project files to follow along. To get project files for any of my tutorials, just visit my website and go to the File Vault, or you can click the File Vault link in the description down below this video. Once there, enter your email address to access the growing library of more than 50 project files. Scroll on down until you see the matching thumbnail and then click the download link. You may need to be patient since the Google Drive link can take a few seconds. After it's downloaded, locate the zip file and then extract the folder. Now you've got your project files, it's time to jump on into KeyShot. Now, because this is a complete beginner-friendly tutorial, I wanted to start off with a fresh installation of KeyShot Studio 2024.2 Pro. If you've already used KeyShot and have your user interface configured the way you want, go ahead and skip forward to the next section. There will be chapters down below. The first thing I want to do is close this welcome window, and then in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to go to Edit and Preferences. I'm going to change my font size from 9 to 11, which is going to scale up a lot of the elements within the KeyShot user interface. If you're on a high resolution monitor, this may help, but if you're not, then you may not need to do this. Next, I'll navigate to the ribbon at the top and move left toward the workspaces and change it from Startup to Default. This gives us access to the library panel on the left and the project panel on the right. Now, if you want to create a little bit more room here in the middle, I recommend we get rid of the text labels down here in our toolbar. So I'm going to right click and turn off text. This just gives us icons. Since we don't click on these buttons often, I really don't think we need them there. And if you want to save these changes to this workspace or create a new one, you can go to the workspaces and either apply changes or add. This gives us the chance to make a new workspace, which I could call Will's Workspace. And there you go. Okay, the next thing we need to do is import a 3D model for rendering. So I'm going to go to those project files we downloaded, find the step file, drag that into KeyShot's real-time view, and then we can see our import options. Now, generally speaking, I use these at their default value, but there's one thing I want to make sure we change, and that is this under Materials and Structure. I want to uncheck Unlink Materials by Part Name. What this does is this enables us to automatically link any parts that have the same color applied to them. So for instance, when I'm working in CAD, I tend to use the same colors on the objects that will be the same materials. And this saves me a step in KeyShot so I recommend unchecking Unlink Materials by Part Name unless you have a reason not to. Next, I'll just hit Import. Now that we've imported our model, you might start hearing your computer make some noise. That's because KeyShot's always rendering in the real-time view at any given moment. And by default, KeyShot has 100% access to your CPU, which for stability and resources management, I don't think is the best option. I recommend we go a couple steps down. If you have a lot of cores in your machine like I do, you can maybe afford to go about halfway down. This is going to quiet your computer a fair bit and reduce the load on your CPU. If you have a nice GPU or graphics card, like an NVIDIA RTX series card, I recommend jumping into GPU mode, which you can do by clicking the GPU button up in the ribbon. Now, the first time you click that, it might take a while to initialize, but after that, it should be pretty much instant. Now let's talk a little bit about navigation. In KeyShot, we're always looking through a camera. So the way we navigate is we move that camera around, which we can do with our mouse. If I left click and drag, this is called tumble. I'm tumbling around the scene. Our camera is basically pivoting around the middle of our model by default. If I click on the middle mouse button, which is typically the scroll wheel, and I move that around, this is called pan. You can pan left and right or up and down. And then finally, we can dolly, which is using the scroll wheel to get closer or further away from the object. This is literally moving our camera closer or further away from our model. So we have tumble, pan, and dolly. Now the next thing I want to do is take care of this obnoxious yellow thing. This is actually a funnel that I'm going to be using in the last step of this tutorial, but I don't want to see or interact with it until then. So I'm going to select it by left clicking on it once, and you can see in the scene tree, which is this area to the right here, it is selected and highlighted in blue. The scene tree basically lists out every item within our 3D model that we've imported, and you can alternatively select it by just clicking on it within the scene tree, and you get this orange outline that indicates that it has been selected. As long as we're in the scene tab, we'll get that orange outline. If we navigate away to any of these other tabs, that orange outline goes away. So I'm gonna grab that funnel and I'm going to do a hide and lock. We can either hide it by just clicking that eyeball, which temporarily hides it, or we can hide and lock, which is right click, hide and lock. And that lock on the hidden state means that I'm not actually going to make it show up whenever I don't want to. If I want to move something, I also need to select it, which I can do from anywhere within the scene tree, or I could also do it by, again, selecting it in the real-time view. Now, if I want to take this upper assembly and move it, I can go to the position sub-tab right underneath that scene tree, and we have a button for the move tool. When I click on the button for the move tool, we get this little floating bar, which we can somewhat dock. And then from here, we can change our move state. So we have translate, rotate, and scale. And we can toggle any one of these on or off at any given point. To make it easy, I like to leave just one of them on. Now, translate is going to give us the choice to move an item in one direction at a time or in two directions at a time, just clicking and dragging. We can also go into rotate and do what we need to there. Now, there is some extra functionality that KeyShot added in 2024, and there are shortcuts now to move between all of these states. So for example, if I just want to translate, I hit T, and that's going to move me into translate mode. Then if I hit Y and move my mouse, we can see we're now constrained to the Y axis. I can hit X, and now I'm constrained to the X axis. Now let's say I want to rotate. I just go press R to go into rotate mode and then choose an axis. So if I want to rotate it around the Y axis, I hit Y and now it's going to spin around the Y axis. If I hit Z, it'll rotate around the Z axis. And finally, if I want to scale, I hit S. Pretty easy to remember. And then if I want to scale it along, say, the X axis, I'll just hit X and now I can start moving my mouse to scale it along that axis. If I hit Y, of course, we're going to do that too. So those are some of the shortcuts we have. I'm going to hit cancel to just undo all of that and give you one more shortcut to remember. If you need to move something and you don't want to go through menu items here, you can just hover over a part and hit Control D as in Delta, and that automatically will select that part. Then we could go back into translate, Y, and start moving things around like that. So that's a little rundown on the move tool. It has some more advanced features, but we're gonna skip those for now. The big takeaway is you can move parts in a number of ways, and the simplest way to do so is just select it in the scene tree, then click that move tool. So the last thing I wanna do before we start applying materials is set up our canvas, if you will. That's our aspect ratio. I wanna go to Image, down to Resolution Preset, and since I want this to be vertically oriented, I'm gonna go to Portrait instead of Landscape. And then I wanna go down to the 4x5 preset. As I dolly closer to the model, we can see that this is a much more comfortable or appropriate composition or layout for the vertical form of this model. KeyShot's kind of like an onion. It's got layers. Today we're peeling back the first couple of them, but there's so much more than I can cover in this video. And if you'd like to work through a proven step-by-step beginner-friendly course, consider buying my KeyShot Rendering Masterclass. You'll find a link to it in the description down below. Now, let's jump back in. Okay, let's start applying some materials. KeyShot's got a pretty good sized material library, and we can go and browse through those folders if we want, but I prefer just to search for what I need. Now I'm gonna search for a hard, shiny plastic. I wanna change my view to list view so I can read the full name of each material. Left click and drag to move one of those materials onto a part within my scene. Now, if I look under the scene tree, we have a material sub-tab, and when I click on that, we see our hard, shiny plastic has been applied. We can also go into list view here, and we can see that by default, all of our materials are diffuse, and then we also have our one plastic material. If I right click on it and say, select parts with material, that's going to show that we have several items within our scene tree that are highlighted in blue. That's telling me that they all have this black plastic material applied to them currently. And the reason that worked out that way is because of our import settings. We turned off that option that unlinked by default all of our different parts based on the name of them. So because they all had the same color applied to them, that grayish color, they all receive this hard, shiny black plastic. So this is gonna save us quite a bit of time in setting up our scene. Now, of course, we can unlink those as needed, which we will in a little bit. But let's go ahead and start by applying the rest of our basic materials. Next, I'm gonna search for a polycarbonate, P-O-L-Y-C, and we have a few options here. I'm gonna take this plastic polycarbonate and I'm gonna drag that right on to the glass looking part in the middle. It's actually a plastic instead of a glass. We also need some sort of plastic on this part here. And here's a little shortcut. We can copy and paste a material. Let's say we know we want this also to be plastic, but maybe we want to make some changes to it. I'm gonna go ahead and select this shiny black plastic. You can right click on it and say copy material, which is right here. Or if you prefer keyboard shortcuts, hold down the Shift key and then left click on it. Now it's been copied to your clipboard. Now to paste it onto this next part here, you would do Shift and right click. When that pastes that material, it pastes it as a copy. What that means is if we make one change to one of these, then the other is also gonna change. And we don't really want that. We want this to be a slightly different color or texture. So what I'm gonna do is actually go ahead and unlink it. I can do that by left clicking it once, now it's been selected, and I can right click and go to unlink material. And now if we were to change this material's color, which I can do by double clicking and going to our diffuse property, I could make this a bit of a gray color, and you can see that it's now changed colors without affecting the other black shiny plastic material. So on this top one, I want to make this a metal, but I also want to make sure that I put the right texture on it. So instead of looking for a generic metal within our library, I'm going to manually change this to metal, and we can do that by selecting it, double clicking on it. When we double click on a part, you can see we've shifted from our scene tab that had all of our individual items to our materials tab. When you double click on an item, it shows you the materials. This is a white, that's the color, and it's a diffuse type material. I know I want this to be some sort of metal, so I'm gonna click on diffuse and change it from the diffuse to a metal. And now you can notice it's reflecting its environment quite a bit more. So it's now metallic instead of diffuse. Down here at the bottom, we also have this rubber handle for the grinder. So I'm actually gonna search for a rubber in our library, and I'm gonna drag that right onto that bottom part as well. So now we're looking pretty good. We have a few parts here that don't have materials yet. And the way I know that is I can navigate to this in-scene materials list like we did before. You'll see that we still have some materials that have a diffuse type material. So in KeyShot, there's typically two ways to do something. There's the keyboard shortcut, and then there's the right click menu. So if we right click on this part, I can go to hide part. I'll go ahead and undo that. The other shortcut way is Control Alt left click, and that's gonna hide that from view. And we can Control Alt left click anything that we've already applied a material to, because we want to get access to the parts that don't have materials on them quite yet. So I'm gonna start hiding some of these parts so we can see what's left over here. So most of them have materials, but there are a few here that still need some. So in this case, we have this little mode selector. The plastic part inside should be the same material. So let's practice the linking of these materials. Shift left click, copy, Shift right click, paste and link. So those two are now linked together. So if we make a change to one, they'll both change together. Let's go ahead and hide those. Control Alt left click, and that will hide both of those. Now these screws here, we already have a metal on them. That's because we applied that metal to that top piece. And I want these screws to be a different finish than that top part that we had there. So let's go ahead and unlink these screws from the rest. Select, right click, unlink material. This next one, we can also unlink the material, or alternatively, we could Shift left click to copy the one we just unlinked, Shift right click, and that means that these two are now linked together, but separated from the other metal piece that we already turned off. So let's hide these screws, Control Alt left click, Control Alt left click, and we're getting close here. We have a couple more to go. These are ceramic burrs. So for now, I'm just going to turn them into a plastic. So I'm just gonna double click, and we're gonna change the type from diffuse down to plastic. And I'm just gonna make these a bit of a greenish gray, which is kind of I know it's kind of an odd color, but we're gonna go almost brown, something like that. That should be good. Let's go ahead and hide those. And we have a spring. We know we want this to be a metal. We'll just double click on that, change it to metal. And we have the shaft down here in the middle. I also want that to be a metal. And now these are not gonna be linked just because I turned them into a metal because they were already unlinked because they were different colors. We're not gonna keep this a yellow. We'll change this to some sort of a grayish color for now. And then we've got this little guy here. This little washer is a plastic. We can change this to a plastic material. It'll be white, but we're just gonna make it a little bit more of a grayish white. This guy right here is also a black plastic. So we could potentially link it to one of these others. So there's a black plastic here. I could shift left click to copy, shift right click to paste linked. Let's see if we hide this guy here. We have one more here. Let's make sure these are two, yes, these two are already linked. And I know that because when I double click on it, the material on the right-hand side does not change. Whereas if I double clicked on one of these metals, it would change. So now we've basically made sure that all of our parts in our entire scene have realistic materials. And we can see that because in our material list, within our scene material list, we don't see any more diffuse materials. Now to bring everything back that we've hidden, we right click and show all parts. And now they come back into view. In this tutorial, I want to focus on making sure the materials read correctly, that they look like they represent what we see on the product in real life without going overboard on the details. So what we need to do next is actually change our lighting environment so this looks a bit more realistic as far as lighting goes, and then we're going to finish off the material section. So we're going to go to the Environment tab. This is where you control your lighting. Right now, if I dolly all the way out, we will see this little sphere. This is our HDRI. This is where our lighting is coming from. Now we want to change that to something that's a bit more dynamic, that has a bit more contrast. I'm going to go to our library of environments and double click on this 3 panels straight 4K. That's automatically going to apply that new HDRI. So now you can see it's got a bit more contrast. And when we get closer to our product, we see the shiny materials look a lot shinier and the metal looks a lot more reflective. So this is gonna give us a bit more realism. Now, because the background of our environment is very distracting, we're just gonna hit C on the keyboard to go into color mode. And if you didn't want the shortcut, all you have to do is go under the background and go from lighting environment to color. And by default, it's just gonna be a white background. From here, we can start making some more adjustments to our materials to make this look a bit more realistic. Now, before we apply our label to this black plastic piece, I wanna make sure I unlink it from all the other black plastic parts. So our label doesn't show up on any surfaces that we don't want it to. We can left click on that to select that part, right click, and then do unlink material. And this is just gonna ensure that our label stays on this part only. Next, I'll grab my project files that we downloaded, and I'll find the PNG that's transparent, not the one that's black and white. It should be called Oxo Peppermill label _ 1200 DPI. I'm gonna drag this right onto that black plastic part. When I let go with my mouse, I wanna go to add label. Now it's not being mapped or positioned correctly on the surface. We're gonna fix that here. But first we want to change the mapping type from planar, which is a flat plane, to cylinder, because this is a cylindrical shape. So in the right-hand side within our material properties, we're going to go down to cylinder. And let's open up that move texture button again. We want to center this on the part, which means it's going to align the middle of this texture with the middle of this part. That's an easy one to forget. But when you center on part, now these two are aligned in the middle. So I'll hit fit to Y, which is the Y axis, that's the up and down axis. I'll click on the Y button, and now it should be scaled pretty much to the appropriate size. And we just need to rotate it into place. So if I rotate by grabbing that Y axis, I can kind of rotate it around. And now if we're not sure about getting that exactly positioned, we can do something a little more advanced here. Under our sizing and mapping, we should have an angle option here that we can drop down. And if we set this angle to 0, we'll see it's facing here. So we need to rotate it 90 degrees the opposite direction. So on angle, if we type in 90, you'll see it goes a quarter turn in the direction we want. Now I can be assured that this is centered on the front of this part. Once I'm done with that, I'll hit the green checkbox to save the position of that label. If you're unsure about the exact size, we could also increase the size of it ever so slightly. So I'm going to take the width of this and I could just increase it a little bit to my liking. And if we need to, we can of course just move it up and down to try to make sure it's centered on that part appropriately. Now there's one more thing that we don't really have to do here, but I think a lot of you are gonna wanna know how to do this. Let's say you want this label to kind of stick off the surface a little bit to look like it's been printed on with, say, like some ink or something like that. We're gonna do this in the material graph. You don't have to do this in the material graph, but I think it's a lot easier to conceptualize what we're doing. So I'm gonna click on the material graph to open that up, and our screen's gonna get a little bit busy here. So what I'm gonna do is close our library panel on the left, and that's gonna move KeyShot over just a bit. So if I zoom on out, we have our nodes. This is a root node that represents this plastic piece. This is a plastic material that's representing the black shiny plastic on the surface here. And then this one here is our label material, which represents the plastic material this label's made out of. And then we also have this little graphic. This is our PNG that's actually dictating the color of this label or logo. So if we want to make this thing kind of bump out, there's an easy way to do this. So we want to hold Alt and click and drag to duplicate this node and plug it into the bump channel of this plastic label. Now we actually have a special specific texture made for the sole purpose of giving this some 3D sort of shape. So I want to double click on this node and we're going to replace it with the one that we want to use for the bump. So when we double click on it, we're going to go to the folder that shows the file path, and we're going to click on that folder, and I'm going to navigate to those project files we downloaded. And instead of taking the first label we used that gave us the color, we want to use the black and white version that gives us the bump. And I hit open, and what we should see is that it looks a little bit bumpier, a little more round, and this is a special texture that is going to optimize this result. Now, if we zoom out, it might be sticking out a little bit too much. So I like to make this very subtle. So with this node selected, I want to scroll over to the properties and we want to open up the bump section. And you see the bump height set to 1. I want to bring this down to a small number like 0.1, which is going to give us a very, very subtle edge to this texture. And I think that's going to be pretty good for our use cases here. Now, while we're in the material graph here, we can add just a little bit more detail to this material. This is a shiny plastic, but when you leave something completely smooth, it looks too artificial and too perfectly smooth to be realistic. So we do need to add a little bit of texture or imperfection here. And the way you do that is we're gonna add a little bit of roughness. So what I wanna do is go into my plastic node that's plugged into the surface here of the root node. Double click on this here. And we know this is the black plastic because we can see here, if we were to adjust its color, it's going to change that plastic. We're gonna go ahead and just hit OK, and then I'm gonna hit Control Z to undo that. All I wanna do is add some roughness. The roughness is going to spread our reflections out on the surface. And we still want this to be pretty shiny, but not perfectly. So what happens if I do 0.01? That still looks a little bit too rough. So I'm gonna go half of that, which is 0.005. And now that still looks like a shiny material, but when we get close to it, we see it's not perfectly shiny. It's got a little bit of roughness to it. And even if that's a little bit too much, we could cut that in half too, or go a little bit smaller, 0.003 maybe. And then you might have noticed that the plastic that our label is made out of, that also doesn't have any sort of roughness. We double click on that, it has 0 roughness. Let's do the same thing we had here, which is 0.003. Let's go into this one, type in 0.003, and now those two match. So that's gonna give us a nice, realistic finish for that material. So from there, I can go ahead and close the material graph, or I could just double click on another part, and now we're editing that material graph for that material that we clicked on. So for this mode selector, I actually want this to be black, but I want it to be a rough black, not so shiny. So I'm gonna double click on this plastic node and edit its color. And for here, I wanna change from RGB to HSV, hue, saturation, and value. So if we have color in here, we have hue is the actual overall color. Saturation is how vibrant basically that is. And then value is gonna be how bright or how much white and black we've added to this. So I wanna basically take the saturation to 0. I'm gonna take the value, so it has no color. I'm gonna take the value down to say 12. And then I want to add a little bit of roughness. So I'm gonna type in 0.1. Maybe I go a little higher even, 0.15 maybe. That's looking pretty good, nice matte finish. If we want to move on to another part, we can double click on it and we can see its material graph Again, we've got the root node, then we've got the material that it's made out of, basically a plastic, and then we've got a texture on the surface. This is a noise texture. This gives us a little bit of that grain that we want so that it looks like rubber. To me, it's looking a little too smooth, so I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. So our scale is set to 0.2. If we wanna see this visually, we can select the node and right click and either go down to preview color, or you see the shortcut is C on the keyboard. So we can preview that color, and you see it's got all these little dots, and the black or darker colors are gonna represent the little pits in the surface. So if we make this from 0.2 to say 0.35, make it a little bigger, get out of that preview with C once again, we should start to see that texture. It's not very strong, so let's make it higher. Let's take our bump height to 0.5, and now we'll start to see we really have a texture that looks tactile, like you can actually touch it and feel it. That looks pretty good, maybe a little bit too big, so I can bring this scale down to say 0.25. And then if we wanted it to look even sharper, you could always increase the bump height as needed. Well done, you made it through part 1. In the next video, we're gonna pick up right where this video left off, and then we'll finish up our materials and then move on to lighting, cameras, and render settings. So I'll see you in part 2.